we've been looking at experiences of something that comes to us as a gift. And that's to prepare us to think of faith as a gift of God. The examples I've given you from our ordinary human experience make it clear that it's not easy to distinguish between what we do in nature and what we do by the grace or gift of God. It also makes it clear that very often our natural, ordinary experiences lead us to a meeting with the gifts of God. One modern writer, Daniel O'Leary, who's helped many people in the catechetical field and pastoral field, has something very interesting to give us in a book called Begin with the Heart. He's stressing what I've just said, that very often our ordinary experience leads us into a meeting with God and His grace, His gifts. It's very important to understand the background to O'Leary's book. See, before Vatican II, we were in a period in which there was a lot of negativity, a lot of fearfulness, a rather pessimistic view of human nature. And O'Leary is speaking to many teachers who would have either lived in that period or else have been formed by the same approach. Now that we look back over the history of Christian thought, we can recognise that rather pessimistic period was not typical. It was something of a regression. See, in Christian thought, as in all human projects, there's an ebb and flow. There are advances made, then sometimes there's a stepping back, losing sight of some of the riches. That pessimistic view was not the view of the early fathers of the Church, nor the great thinkers of the Middle Ages. Let's describe the pessimistic view. O'Leary gives us a very good comparison. He said, because nature and grace are distinct, we tend to make them almost in opposition with one another, as if we lived in a two-storey house. So the bottom story is nature. Their nature is very fragile, easily led astray, tempted, sinful, hard to control. At the level of grace, God's work is like a rescue mission for people who are lost in nature. So the people's view of life is pretty pessimistic. It's very hard to get to heaven. And as I said, that was not the view of the early fathers of the Church. They had a far more optimistic view of nature. Man made in the image of God. I'll give you a very striking example. Clement of Rome wrote at the end of the 1st century. He wrote to the Corinthians who were fighting among one another. He wrote a letter in the name of the Church of Rome. And in his letter, that really helped to solve the problems of the Corinthian church, he said, from the beginning of time, God has had his faithful ones, and in the end, they will be revealed. There's a very optimistic view of human history, that God has had his faithful ones down through the ages. We're not the saved, full stop. We're the first fruits of the saved. We're the pathfinders of the saved. But God's grace begins at work in all people. So the fathers of the church, the early fathers, great leaders in Christian faith, they had this optimistic view of the Peters of the world who were not abandoned by God. And then the medieval thinkers, they had the same outlook. Grace and nature are distinct. Clearly, there are times when we go beyond what we could do from our own capacities, and it's only through the gift of God. but they're not in opposition with one another, and they're closely associated right through life. That's the view that's been recovered since the Second Vatican Council. The Constitution on the Church in the Modern World, one of the key documents of Vatican II, which calls for a more positive relationship with the ongoing story of humanity, has this wonderful principle to guide us. It says, it's only in the light of the Word incarnate, only in the light of Christ coming as one of us, as man, that the true situation of humanity becomes clear. In other words, Christ is a model for us. We share in his life. He struggled, he lived in this world, he was tempted, but in the end he was triumphant. And he brought healing and new life for all of us. And then the Constitution goes on to say, all this is true not only of the baptized, those who have shared in Christ's life through baptism, but of all men and women of good will, in whom God's grace is working in a hidden way. There's the optimistic view that we should have. Nature is not our enemy, our stumbling block. Nature's the way that leads to life. And if we're really in touch with our nature, then we will really find the things of God. I'll just quote a couple of O'Leary's sayings. He says, in the hearts of young people, God has inscribed a promise. And their desire for completeness is the yearning of God in their nature. God is yearning in our nature as we seek the fullness of life. And if we get in touch with those yearnings, then we'll be open to the workings of God in our life. He said, experience, our ordinary human experience, ups and downs of daily life, they open us to a meeting with God in our lives. We can become aware of God working and leading us in our lives. He said, the yearnings of young people and the fulfillment of those yearnings is God's dream coming true in their lives. There's a wonderful positive view that gets in touch with the ordinary struggle of being human, but relates to what God is doing in our lives. St. Augustine has words that have been quoted time and time again. You made us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless till they rest in you. We're made in the image of God. As I said, there's an openness in our nature, and God, by his grace and creative power, can lead us beyond the limits of our nature to share in his own life. I think it's a wonderful thing to think that the yearnings of our heart are signs that point forward to what God really wants for us. The yearnings of our heart tell us what the kingdom of God will be like, when God's ways rule all things. We look at the world and we see it's very different from what we'd like it to be. There's distrust, there's violence, there's hatred, there's frustration. But the yearnings of our heart want peace. They want reconciliation. They want generosity. They want all good things flourishing. And if we get in touch with the yearnings of our heart, we are in touch with God's dream, as O'Leary puts it, for the world.